this idea of what could cause the universe is what Daniel, the way that Daniel Dennett puts it. He just simply says the universe caused itself. That sounds a little bit intellectual, but if you think about it, it just can't make logical sense. In order for something to cause itself to exist, that would assume that it already existed, but if it already existed, how is it causing itself to exist? This doesn't make, it's a logically incoherent statement. So the universe can't have come from nothing, it can't have caused itself, so we just stuck at this question again. What can cause the universe to exist? Well, let's just approach this logically. What do we know? The universe is comprised of time, space, and matter. And so whatever caused the universe to exist, whatever it is, it cannot be comprised of time, space, or matter. It can't be beholden to time, it can't embody space, it can't be comprised of matter. Therefore, this cause has to be timeless, has to be spaceless, and has to be immaterial. Now we can also deduce a few extra clues. In order for whatever this cause is to cause the whole universe to exist, it has to be incredibly powerful. That's a fourth thing we can know. And the fifth and final thing is, whatever caused the universe to exist must be personal. There are many reasons, but I'll just give one for now. One is that there's really only two possibilities for something that can be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. The first is it could be an abstract object. But the problem is abstract objects, by their nature, cannot cause things. So for example, numbers are abstract objects, and they don't have a cause that makes them exist. Numbers just exist. But the number 7 can't actually cause anything to happen. It's an abstract object. The only other thing that could be both timeless, spaceless, and immaterial would be an unembodied mind. Now, a mind has the ability to have free will, choice, and volition. It can choose to cause something unlike an abstract object. And so it makes sense then that this unembodied mind be personal. So let's just review what information have we been able to gather. Well, whatever causes the universe, it cannot be beholden to time, cannot embody space, cannot be comprised of matter, must be immensely powerful, and must be personal. When we look at the criteria here for what could have caused the universe, there is only one thing or one being that matches this description, and that is God. When we talk about God in theology and in philosophy, we're talking about a being who is timeless, who is spaceless, who is immaterial, who is immensely powerful, who is personal. And God is the only one, the only being or thing that matches this description of what could have caused the universe. Now, what I've shared with you is often called the cosmological argument, an argument that derives from the cosmology of our universe, or the origins of the universe. But what's interesting about this argument is it's purely a logical deduction. That means to say, unless you can find a fault with one of the premises in the argument, the conclusion logically has to follow. So, to summarize, the premises are this. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. Premise 4, the cause of the universe must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, personal, and powerful. Number 5, the only thing that is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, and personal is God. Therefore, God must have caused the universe. Unless you can find a fault in one of those 5 premises, the conclusion logically follows. And so we have to face the reality, we have to face the facts that their logic and their evidence points us to God being the most likely and really the only possible solution to this question of what can cause the universe. I want to give one more argument for the existence of God tonight. This time I'm going to give you the argument straight up. The last one, the cosmological, we worked our way through. This second one, I'm just going to give you straight up. This is called the argument from morality. And it goes like this. Point number one, or premise number one, is this. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. Let's just define a term quickly. What do we mean by objective? What does it mean for morals to be objective? Objective here means it is valid and... For example, when we look at what the Nazi Party did during the Holocaust, everyone, not everyone, but the majority of Germans at that time thought what they were doing was good. But according to objective moral values, that is not good. It doesn't matter whether people believed it was good or not. What they were doing was objectively evil. That's what we mean by objective morality. The challenge of the first premise is that without God, objective moral values cannot exist. That is to say, without an objective reference point, or without an objective standard outside of humanity, morals are reduced to being relativistic. Morals are simply one person's opinion over another, one culture's fashion over the other cultures. But there's nothing in this world that is actually truly good or evil if there isn't a standard outside of humanity that can say this is objectively good and evil. Rather, we'd be living in a world that Richard Dawkins describes like this. He says there be no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. This is Dawkins' own admission that without God, this is the kind of world that naturally follows. A world in which there cannot truly be objective good or evil. But if God does exist, then he is able to be the standard of right and wrong. So, and that standard would be from his own character and nature and essence. So, for example, if God is loving, it would therefore be good to be loving, and evil to hate will be indifferent. If God is merciful, then it is good to be merciful, and it is evil to be unmerciful. If God is honest, it's good to be honest, and it's evil to tell lies and be dishonest. So now God is able to serve as an objective outside reference point for humanity, and now we have something that can actually demonstrate to us what is objectively morally good and evil. So it's logically valid that God can serve as an outside and objective standard for objective morals. But some others, again, have given different propositions for how we can maybe come with different methods of determining objective morals. One method that people appeal to is, well, we judge by majority rule. Whatever our culture predominantly says is objectively good, that is what is good. You're probably already in your brain figuring out how that falls short. Let's just go back to the example we already used. Nazi Party back in Germany. In Germany, the majority said it's good to kill Jews. Did that make it right? No, it was an evil thing to do. What about cultures where slavery has been the majority acceptable standard? Just because the majority said slavery was okay does not mean it is. So the majority rule is not a very good reference for objective morality. What's a second option that people appeal to? The second option would be, I'll put it up here, evolution. So this is the appeal to, well, we have evolved as a species to do what is right and moral. Just through the process of evolution over time, we have developed these innate morals, and in a sense they serve as an objective moral standard. But evolution really can't answer, can't really be a source for objective morality. Think of it this way. If we were to wind the clock back to the very first protoplasm or whatever that came to life, and evolution went in a slightly different direction, we could just as easily be living in a world right now where murder and violence and rape were morally good. If we just went down that different path of evolution, all those things would be good, and none of us here would be saying today, murder and violence are evil and wrong. So what it shows is evolution perhaps could contribute to morality, but it cannot give an objective standard to morality. In fact, it's completely arbitrary because things could have evolved in a completely different way. The third alternative is, well, we do whatever is best for human flourishing. That is the objective standard. But, and this sounds good, right? Human flourishing is good. But philosophically, this isn't a very good argument either. Because who's to say that human flourishing is any more important or better than fish flourishing, or rat flourishing, or plant flourishing? We could appeal to our consciousness, but really all we're doing is appealing to a sophisticated type of speciesism. So human flourishing, yeah, it probably is convenient for us. We probably like it that way, but it's not a real objective standard of morality. So premise one is true, that without God, there cannot be any such thing as objective morality. Let's come to premise two though. Premise two said that objective moral values do exist. Maybe you're willing to accept, okay, I get it, without God as this outside reference point, okay, there's no objective morals, but maybe there just isn't objective morals. So why are we even debating it? Well, the way that we can demonstrate objective moral values and duties exist is quite simple. In the same way that when we interact with the physical world, we acknowledge it really exists. Our experience in the physical world tells us it's real. Our experience in the moral realm also tells us morality is a real thing. I'm going to ask for a bit of participation from you. Can I get you to raise your hand if you believe that racism, sexism, bigotry is an evil thing? Anyone willing to be brave enough to say those are evil things, right? Okay. Now the question is, do you believe those are really evil things or just a fashionable thing? Do we believe that bigotry is an evil thing just because it's not popular with our culture at the time, or is bigotry an actually evil thing? I think deep down all of us would say, no, bigotry is an actual evil thing. None of us probably would say, well, murder, it doesn't help human flourishing, or it doesn't fit the way we evolved to survive as a community, so that's why murder is wrong. No, we recognize intuitively that murder is an actual, real, moral wrong. All right, I'll ask you to raise your hands again. Can you raise your hand if you believe that love, generosity, and humility are actually very good virtues? Do you believe that those are good virtues? Okay, we're in unanimous agreement. Now the question is, do we believe that being loving and generous and honest with your neighbor is just a process of evolution that we picked up along the way and is kind of useful? Or are they actually, really, genuinely, objectively good things? Our moral experience tells us, no, these are really good or really evil things. It's funny, if we saw someone getting mugged in the street, we would yell out and say, hey, that's not fair, you've got to stop doing that, what you're doing is evil. And when we make that appeal, we're not thinking, well, it's evil according to the law of New South Wales, which we've developed. We're thinking, no, what I am seeing right now is an objectively real evil thing. And so the second premise is equally true. So premise one is that without God, objective moral values cannot exist. We saw that is true. We cannot justify objective morality without God as the standard outside of us. Then secondly, we saw, well, yes, objective moral values do exist. We comprehend it by our experience with morality. So then thirdly, the conclusion logically follows that therefore, if objective morals do exist and they can only find their origin in God, that therefore God must exist. Now I'm going to quickly field probably one or two questions or objections you're thinking of. One of them might be, are you saying, Christopher, that to be a moral person you need to believe in God? Well, no, actually. I'm saying the opposite, right? This argument does not depend on a person believing in God to be moral. We see people from every walk of life being moral, and in fact that's kind of what the argument hinges on, right? That everyone knows objective moral values exist. So the argument actually presupposes you don't need to believe in God to be a moral person. So no, you can not believe in God and be a good moral person. Secondly, you might be thinking to yourself, well, if objective moral values exist, why is it we don't always agree on moral issues? Now notice the argument doesn't say that every moral or ethical question is easy to answer. There are really difficult moral and ethical problems that we come across in life, right? The famous one, do you lie to the Nazi soldier who asks you if you're hiding Jews? These are real hard questions to give an answer to. But we have enough clear-cut, black and white examples of objective good and evil to substantiate the claim that yes, objective moral values do exist. Is it hard to sometimes know in a particular situation what the moral thing to do is? Yes, it can be. But we have enough examples to know, yeah, objective moral values do in fact exist. I want to wrap up with this final thought, because it's not only objective moral values that come from God, it's also other concepts like purpose, meaning, value in life. The famous atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, he came up with the famous statement that everyone knows, God is dead. Everyone's heard that, right? And a lot of the time we think this is like Nietzsche kind of fist pumping and going, yeah, we finally did it. We took God down philosophically. But if you actually read the whole section that quote derives from in his book, I believe it's Thus Spake Zarathustra, he's actually lamenting the fact that without God, everything collapses. This is coming from an atheist philosopher who's just trying to logically follow where does his worldview take him. And he realized that when you take God out of the equation as a subjective reference point, you no longer have an objective standard for meaning, value, and purpose in life. And so when he's saying God is dead, he's almost kind of losing his mind. You read him and he says, my goodness, now that we've killed God, what do we do? And Nietzsche and many of the philosophers at this time all came to the same conclusion that without God, human life is completely nihilistic. That is, life becomes absurd because there is no objective meaning. Now that doesn't mean that you have to, again, believe in God to have a meaningful life. Stacks of people don't believe in God, don't believe in anything, and will live a meaningful life. The problem is they can't philosophically justify that meaningful life. If you ask them why is it meaningful, they can't give a philosophical answer. In practice they can do it, but they can't justify it. And many people, even today, do the same. They go, well, I know there's no real meaning to life, but I make my own meaning. And I have to commend the people who do that, because they are trying to find a solution to the problem. But if we're being honest, that's kind of living in a bit of denial, right? You're saying, I know there's no real meaning to life, but I'll try to do it. If you look at the atheist philosophers of Nietzsche's time, most of them were kind of depressed because they were in this box of nihilism and going, what on earth have we done by taking God out of the equation? You know, they weren't the first to think of this though. Even in the Bible, you think, what? The Bible's written by people who believe in God. Why would they talk about this? But even in the Bible, people wrestled with this question. This is from King Solomon, who wrote this beautiful book of poetry and wisdom called Ecclesiastes. And he had everything in life. He says in chapter 2 of the book, he says, I was the king. I built palaces, I had the finest food, I had servants, I had women, I had horses and chariots. I did everything. He says, anything my eyes saw, I did it. And here was his conclusion. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. This is a writer from the Bible. And he had the same thoughts that Nietzsche would have over 1,000 years later, that without God, human life cannot have an objective reference of meaning, purpose, and value. And like the scientists predict, eventually, if something doesn't happen to intervene, this universe will be destroyed, all life in the universe will be gone, and nothing that we did here on this planet will have any significance, because it'll all be gone. That's the cosmic scale of nihilism that we have to wrestle with in the absence of God as this objective standard of not only morality, but meaning, purpose, and value. Now, I'm not trying to depress you too much with that, but I hope it can be a bit of a sober awakening, right, to what's at stake here. When talking about questions of does God exist, and this isn't just, philosophical musings, this actually affects the way we live our day-to-day life. So let me just wrap up what we've looked at tonight before we kind of put a close to things. We looked at two arguments tonight, the cosmological and the moral argument. The cosmological, talking about the fact that the universe began to exist, it had a cause, and the only thing that matches the description of what could cause the universe was God. And then secondly, we looked at the argument from morality, that if for objective morality to exist, it must come from God, and that since objective morality does exist, it points us to the reality of God. As we keep going through these presentations, looking at different pieces of evidence, they're going to show us more and more clearly, cumulatively building up, there really is a reason to believe in God. And if we can believe in God, not just for wishful thinking, not because we'd like it to be true, but we can really see intellectually, this makes sense, that's where we get hope for life from. That's where meaning and purpose and value can come into life, not because we've really just wished for it deeply enough, but we can see intellectually, this is the real deal. God does exist, and now has an impact on the way that I live my life. The next session that we're going to go through is looking at evidence from science, and this is going to be next week. We're taking a bit of a longer break, but we'll see you next week. I hope I've kind of whet your appetite at least a little bit and made you think, man, I really want to know what these next pieces of evidence are. Maybe you're even wondering, how can you have scientific evidence for a God who is immaterial? Well, we're going to get into that next time. But I just want to leave you with one challenge for tonight, and that's this. If you learned something new this evening, if you felt challenged, if you found what you heard interesting tonight, please come again next week, and don't come alone, bring a friend. That's my challenge to you. If you found this interesting, challenging, stimulating in some way, come again next week, and next time, bring a friend to come and share in this journey with you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I hope you've learned something new. And I think we got Tom. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to open up to the floor now if anyone has any questions, Chris, that we can answer now.
Yeah. Just with the cosmological argument, could you go into a bit more detail as for why the characteristics for a creator of the universe must be personal? Can you just expand on that?
Yeah, great question. Let me just pull up something quickly. So as I said, the first, I'll do it in this particular order. Okay. There's three kind of reasons why we can appeal appeal to the fact that the cause must be personal. When it comes to causation, there are two things that can give cause. The first is scientific laws, right? The second is a personal cause. So, for example, my wife Sarah here is sitting in the second row there. I walk into the kitchen and I notice the kettle is on. And I go, Sarah, why is the water boiling? And she goes, well, it's because of the heat, and it's heating up all the atoms inside, and it's making the water rise to a temperature. That's a scientific explanation for the cause, right? She's telling me the science explanation. But she could equally say to me, well, I just wanted to make some nice hot drinks for the two of us. And that's also a valid reason for the cause, right? So when we're looking at what is able to cause things, we're really looking at either a scientific or a personal cause. And we know that there can't be a scientific cause to what causes the universe, because science has to do with observing time, space, and matter, right? What's in the universe. So there can't be a scientific explanation before the things that we can do in science, and they haven't yet come into existence. So we're looking at a personal cause, since it can't be a scientific cause.
So could I make a comment or question? Does that
Yes.
mean we're essentially looking at a volitional or an agency, like something with agency being the cause? Personal might be a step too far, but something with volition or agency might be that step in the middle that would satisfy the question, maybe.
Definitely. So, as going back to the kettle analogy, if we're saying that it can't be the scientific explanation of the kettle is heating up for whatever, we have to then appeal to the personal explanation. There is an agency or some being with a will or volition who can cause. He can will or choose to cause to do something. Another reason it can't be a scientific reason, or we could say an impersonal cause, is if it were an impersonal cause, the effect would be permanent. So, for example, water always freezes when it gets 0 degrees, right? That is the permanent cause of that, we could say, law of nature. But when it comes to the universe only came into being in existence once. There's not an ongoing or permanent effect from the cause. So it can't be, again, an impersonal force, otherwise the effect would just keep going on and on and on for as long as the cause existed. But if the cause is personal, it can choose to have a cause here and for the effect to stop, right? Because it has choice, it can choose. The effect will stop, it won't keep going on forever and ever and ever. And the third would be, again, that appeal to an abstract object can't choose to do anything. So the number 7 fits the criteria of being timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, but the number 7 can't do anything. It's an abstract idea. The moment that the number 7 can do something, it ceases to be abstract and it becomes part of reality. So I hope that kind of answers it. It's all pretty big stuff to get our heads around, but I think we've got lots of good evidence to support. If it's not a scientific explanation, if it can't be an abstract object, then we're looking at a personal force or being that can choose, that has volition and choice to cause the universe. So, great question.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I don't know whether I understood correctly, but the objective moral value.
Yes, yeah.
So God created human in His image. So it means He gave us objective moral value in your presentation. Human created robots, but robots don't have any objective moral value. So in your logic, existence of moral value doesn't mean existence of God. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, do you mind repeating that once more? I don't think I quite
So-
followed it.
God created human in
Yeah.
His image.
Yes.
So it comes with the objective moral value.
Yeah, so we got objective morals
Yeah.
inside us. Yeah.
So human created robot
Yeah.
in human form,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
robots don't have objective moral value.
Okay. They don't. Yeah.
Okay. So in your logic, existence of moral value
Mhm.
doesn't mean existence of God.
No, I would say the existence of objective morals does point to the existence of God. In that, so taking the example of a robot, robots, unlike you and I, aren't able to make free will volitional choices, right? They have to do what they're kind of programmed to do. So a robot can't discern, or a machine can't discern what is right and wrong. Right and wrong demands that we have the ability to choose and have some type of, intellect and ability to think. So I would say the fact that we as human beings are able to discern things from a moral experience in the same way our ability to discern that the physical world exists, we can discern that the moral realm or moral world exists. Now, does a rock know that the physical world exists? Well, no, right? He's not conscious of it. But a human does, so we can validate, yes, it's real. In the same way, a robot, it can't really understand that a moral realm exists, but we as agents with volition and free will, we can, and so we go, well, where does this objective moral values come from? It has to come from something outside of us, otherwise it is just our subjective preferences and tastes. We don't have something to anchor those ideas in. So, I'm not sure if I quite answered that, but I'm happy to talk afterwards. Yeah. Thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah.
Are these arguments arguing for the same God? Are
Mm.
they both of these, or is one like a creator God, and the
Yeah.
moral one like a one within the creative realm that is still considered like a lower tier God, maybe?
That's a really good question. So at the moment, both of these arguments they tell us, we could say, bits and pieces about what we call God, right? So far what we are understanding of God is He's timeless, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, and personal. That's actually quite a lot to go off, right? That's a pretty decent amount of starting knowledge of God. The moral argument, you're right, the moral argument doesn't demand that he matches the identifications of the cosmological argument, but I think you could probably say it logically follows, right? So for example, if he did exist within the universe and was a cause within it, he would probably be subject to the same moral standards as we would be as human agents. So probably, he would, the God of the moral argument would still have to be outside of the universe in order to be that objective outside reference. If he were in the universe, we'd be like, oh, well, that's just that guy's opinion, and this is my opinion, and this is their opinion. So I think the two together tell us a bit more. So we could add to what we know about God, we could say He's a morally good being. So not only powerful and personal, but we could say, He's morally good as well. We're going to probably add a few more dimensions to that in the science one. But what's interesting about these arguments so far is they could relate to probably a number of different conceptions of God. Probably just three mainly. So if you were to ask probably a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim, they could probably each use one of these arguments and say, well, that's my God, right? My God is spaceless, material, and personal, and morally good. And so that's why these first two presentations are looking at a more broad definition of God, and we're going to get a bit more into detail and go, okay, I can get God exists, I can see the logic. How do I know He's actually like the Christian God I read about in the Bible? So that's where we're going to kind of nut out those details in sessions 3, 4, 5. But that's a great question. I think logically, the God of the moral argument, for Him to be the objective standard, would have to be equally or share the same attributes as the God described in the cosmological argument.
Mind if I say something else?
Of
on
course,
that? 'Cause I recently watched I think it was his name's Alex O'Connor.
Yes,
So, and he and I guess the moral argument with good and evil, I kind of understand, where evil is more on the free will choice of people to act evilly. But I guess Alex kind of brings up this idea, and it's the problem of suffering, which is quite a brutal problem, and even like the problem of suffering of animals, say. You know, and like an animal. I think he uses this example of an animal trapped in a fence or something, and it's in agonising pain, and it's kind of unnecessary that a good creator would create a scenario where that's the case, where this deer has no choice in the matter. So it's not evil as such, but it's a problem of suffering.
Yes.
And I struggle with that a lot. I don't know where that fits into this.
For sure. No, it definitely does fit into the question of objective moral good and evil. I've heard Alex's conversation on animals, but I can't say I've done a real deep dive into it or thought of a rebuttal to it. Can't say I ever thought someone would ask me about Alex's animal suffering one. So let me give maybe just a few generic thoughts on the problem of evil, or suffering as well. I think one of the kind of, maybe not ironies, but things to consider is when we often say, like, you know, how can a good God allow, or usually it's framed as God can't exist, or an all-loving God can't exist because we see pain and suffering in the world. Now, in order for that to be a logically valid argument, you actually have to flesh that out a bit, because those two concepts aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. There could be a universe in which there is an all-loving God, and he may have sufficient reason to allow suffering. Maybe it's not a good reason, but you see what I mean? The two concepts don't necessarily negate each other. You could have those two at the same time. But a lot of the time, let's say that's not the case, and we still go, well, I don't get it. Why does God allow evil? Even that in itself still kind of shows to me, well, we're still finding good evidence for God, because the fact that we see the deer suffering in a trap and we go, oh, that's not good. We just know that's not right. That's a wrong thing to happen. When we see evil being done, we're still, again, appealing to this standard outside of ourselves. And so a lot of the time we think, man, evil's a real problem for the existence of God. But for me, I look at it and I go, whenever I see evil, it's just going, there's more evidence for the existence of God. Otherwise, I would look at that and think that's really objectively wrong and evil. So rather than evil being, we could say, evidence against God, it actually kind of fits more as evidence for him, because without it there would be no true good and evil. The case of the animal suffering as well, I think the only other thought I would add into it is when we come to, we'll get specific, the God of the Bible and of Christianity, that God is not, we could say, distant or removed from suffering. In fact, the whole story of the Bible is that God came into human suffering and suffered more than anyone else for the sake of others. And so I think that's another good thing we can keep in mind as we think about these tough questions is God like just hands off and looking and going, well, that deer can suffer and I won't do anything and whatever? Or is this a God who has demonstrated in history, at least that's the claim of Christianity, that God has intimately felt and experienced and shares in human suffering? And really the ultimate end game of the Christian faith is eventually God's going to wrap all this up and there is going to be no more suffering and evil one day too. So I know that's a lot of different ideas, but those are a few thoughts I have on the problem of suffering and of evil. So yeah, thanks, Jack. That's a really good question.
Are there any more questions? If not, I just want to say thank you for Chris for coming all this way and talking to us. I want to thank you guys too, being part of tonight. I'd like to invite you along to the continuation of this series, which will be the 6th, 7th and 8th of March, which is next week, Thursday, Friday and Saturday. So we'll be continuing to go into more depth about evidences for God. Care Group, which is a free meal and Bible study, which is run in ES 204, just across the hallway here. And we also have a church gathering at 10 a.m. on Saturdays. We'd like to invite you all along to them as well to join us. Yeah, for a free meal and yeah, a community that we have here on campus, if that is something that would interest you going forward. I think, yeah, now we have some food prepared outside, so if you are able to stay, we would love to have you stay and to talk with us. I think the food.
Oh wow.
Oh, food's good, yeah.
So, yeah, so just a reminder